Well, hey, welcome back to my shop full of rusty junk and broken things, and this thing here is no exception. Last I checked, you're not supposed to do that with one of the flywheels. This poor old engine got dumped out of a loader bucket by the guy I bought it off of, and he kind of did a number on it. Broke the flywheel, broke the magneto bracket for the ignition, and yeah, kind of ruined this thing. But good old Facebook Marketplace came through for me, and I was able to find a replacement flywheel for this. Could have welded this up, but $100 for a flywheel or welding it and taking a risk of it flying off there, I'll go with the $100 flywheel. So yeah, this old girl's seen some better days. When that thing came down and landed on the ground, she cracked clean off. But I don't think it bent the crank, or at least hopefully it didn't. These are fairly thin webbed flywheels, so I'd say that broke pretty easy. There's also a magneto bracket that goes right here. I've already got it repaired. A friend of mine did the repair on that. The shiny part's the repair. That goes right there. The ignition system, or the magneto, goes on it. But other than that, it's got some few little missing pieces. The fuel spout goes right here, which I can get one on eBay, an original, for like $100, or I can just get a street elbow and come out of the fuel tank, and same thing. So I don't feel like spending $100 for something like that. And where the fuel comes out, there should be a little pipe and a check ball that goes up into, this is the mixer, or what they call the carburetor. Comes out of the fuel tank and goes into this copper line right here. So I need to make one of them, which isn't a big deal. Like I mentioned, this thing's covered, absolutely covered in grease, but you can see blue paint under there. So I'm hoping that all that grease, even more there, has saved a bunch of that blue paint, and I can get all that stuff stripped off there. And it won't be 100% perfect, but it'll look better than it does now. Well, let's take a gander at this flywheel and see what we need to do to get it off of here. It really did a number on it when that thing fell. Broke it there, and obviously all the way around the hub here. This is a split hub. Let's see if I can get it turned here. It's a split hub. So it's clamped onto the shaft, and it is also keyed onto the shaft here. It should just be a straight key, just a square piece of square key stock, and sets into that groove there. So be able to unclamp this, take that bolt out, drive a wedge down in there, get this thing to where it'll move. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll be able to pull this key out. If not, I should be able to, with this thing spread apart with a chisel or a wedge in there, this thing should just slide off. Worst case, get a gear puller on it and pull it off with a gear puller. But so I don't normally suggest beating on cast iron with a hammer, but this thing's already broke. So we're going to do that approach and see if we can tap this thing off, or at least get this key loosened up enough so I can get some pliers on it and get it pulled out and then slide this thing off. It's definitely moving. Let's see if we can get this key out. Slowly. That key's what's holding us up. All right, so I know they make a tool that's like this, like a slide hammer or puller deal. Well, I don't have one. I have a vice grip and a slide hammer. So we're gonna give that a try. Let's see if I can pull this thing out. and not completely ruin my vice grips, I suppose. That didn't work. So what's happening here is the hub is able to move on the key. I can't get the key to come out real easy. Not that I've tried real hard, but the end of this key is swelled up and the hub is getting caught on the end of it. So what I'm gonna do is take a file and try to file the end of this key and get it taken down a little bit. So this will slide off and then we'll pull that key out after I pull this hub off. I don't know if this will show up on camera, but putting this wedge in there has cracked the hub. Now, if the flywheel's together, that probably wouldn't have happened. It had all this to hold that together. But that is something when you're taking these flywheels off, why I don't recommend them pulling flywheels off of a shaft if you don't need to, is you can, for this reason, in the process of taking them off, crack these things. It's pretty easy to hammer that thing in there and cause too much stress on this cast iron and split it. Not really a big deal with this one, but if this was a complete flywheel, nothing wrong with it, and you cracked it, you'd be pretty PO'd. I got to file a little bit. Let's see if this will get her off of here. Let's do a little more filing. Yay! I mentioned the engine we're working on came off as a cement mixer, and not this one particularly. This is made by a different manufacturer. This was Orrin Simbauer Incorporated out of, I think, PA. The one we're working on was made for the Jaeger Machine Company in Columbus, Ohio. They made cement mixers up until I think the 60s. Started around 1906, somewhere in there, up till the late 60s. I don't know when this company on this one went out of business, but they were all fairly similar design. There's your mixer itself. This is a hand crank that you can adjust your mixer drum. Up there to mix, down there to pour, and it's got a little lock on it where you can lock her in and keep her in one position. Pretty similar setup. This is smaller than what the engine would have came off of that we're working on. This only has a 1.5 horse sized motor. See if I can. Yeah. But same setup. It'd have a little doghouse like this, and your motor would be inside it. This one here is direct drive, as you can tell, right to the gear. And the gear goes to the mixer itself. Same company makes this engine here. This is just a 1.5 horse version. The one we're working on is 3.5, so larger. Definitely would have been a larger machine, but much similar to what this is. That would have came off of. So this is a project for down the road. I actually kind of got an idea. I want to get this running and pour concrete countertops in my kitchen with it. So at some point within the next century, I'll get to this thing, but until then, we'll go back and work on the other one. So I know in other videos I've done, I've explained how a hit and miss engine works, but with the flywheel off, you can kind of see the monkey motion a little bit better here, and actually be easier to view this from the top for me to explain it. But you got your crank gear, it goes to your cam gear. This is where your timing is achieved to time the motor. This little gear here is for the governor that's back here. This is called the cam gear because there's actually a cam on the back side of it that moves the push rod here. That push rod, all it does is just activates the exhaust valve. The intake valve is just opened by atmospheric pressure or the piston going back in the cylinder. The valve gets sucked in. It's just got a real light spring on it. Basically kind of works like a fly ball governor. Has a little shaft in here that comes out, and you've seen this thing moving. This is your speed adjustment. And what it does is when the flyweights fly out, this thing has a little pin that comes out, pushes this over, and if this thing is required to coast, this is a little detent right here. This detent catches the exhaust when it's in the open position and holds the push rod forward and lets this thing coast until the governor decides that it's time to fire again, and then it'll release like that and operate the exhaust again. It'll pick up speed when it fires. It decides that it needs to coast again, pushes in, and then when it slows down enough, it releases. So like I said, this is the cam gear. Here's the cam on it. And here's, I guess you could call it a little cam follower right down there. As it spins, cam lobe pushes the push rod forward and then lets it return. Here's the governor. Like I said, it kind of acts like a fly ball governor. And these weights fly out. And as you can see, when they fly out, it moves the detent lever over to latch out the push rod when the thing needs to coast. And you can see by pulling that weight that the detent moves. Pretty simple, not much to go wrong with these things. I did notice that things a little bit loose on it here, got a little bit of wear, but that's pretty typical with one of these. Pretty simple how these things work. They're not a constant RPM. What it is this thing's set at 550 RPMs from the manufacturer. It would fire, and when it got down low enough speed that the governor decided that it needed to fire again, it would fire up to right around 550 RPM and just kind of hover there. If this thing was under a load, it might fire multiple times trying to achieve that speed. And then when it's kind of coasting, not under a load, that's where you get the hit and miss. It'll fire and then coast before it fires again. So just a different type of governing system. That's you see these engines in hit and miss version and what they call throttle governed version. They look identical. All it is just the governing system. This happens to be a hit and miss governed engine. And you could have a engine that's pretty much identical with some different monkey motion on it here, and it would fire every other revolution. That's called throttle governed. So if you want to get picky, this is a flywheel engine with a hit and miss governor. This could be a flywheel engine with a throttle governor. They all look the same in the main shapes. It's just this stuff that changed, the governing system that changes. Well, hopefully you can see a little ramp there on whatever you're watching this video on, but that's what was holding us up. You can kind of see right there what I filed down to get the hub off of that, but that little bit of an incline on that key was what was holding that thing from sliding off there real easy. So I'll get this key tapped out, and before I put the new flywheel on, I'll true that key up, get rid of that little incline, and get it all nice and true. So I guess without further ado, we'll get into tearing this thing apart so we can see what kind of paint's underneath all that ugly, greasy grime. Should come apart pretty easy, as oiled up as it is. So I only have 1 1/8" regular wrench here to take the main caps off. So we're gonna have to break out everybody's favorite tool, the crescent wrench. And I know this is everybody's favorite tool because they told me in the comments, why am I using a crescent wrench? Well, I'm going to tell you a little story about a crescent wrench. Crescent wrench has its place. I know a lot of people use it in daily use. Crescent wrench itself does not round the bolt off. It's the 200-pound gorilla cranking on the other end of the wrench itself is the one that rounds the corners of the bolts off. So you can use a crescent wrench and not tear anything up. You just got to be careful with what you're doing. So I don't want to hear it. Oh wow, look, that broke that loose, and I didn't do any damage. Wah. There's still a little bit of coolant left in this thing, so it has a little handy dandy drain on it. So we're going to drain her out into this little used jug. And then we're going to pull the head off and pretty much have it down to all the further I'm going to take it to start cleaning up the crusty grime off of it. Yeah. Fine. I'll take that out. Oh no, crescent wrench. R&R. I used a crescent wrench. Ah, there we go. Yeah. Well, now we got this thing all blown apart. I'll do all the small pieces in the parts washer over there. And then I'll grab that pan and put it underneath the sub base and the cylinder and the hopper here. Get this thing sprayed down with some diesel fuel and get the crap that's on it softened up. Get it scraped off. Do all that right there. Like I said, the small stuff in the parts washer. And then I'll get to figuring out what bits and pieces I need to order. Definitely a bearing for the connecting rod. Probably either make or buy, if I can find one, a wrist pin bushing. May even, if it's bad enough, may even have to make a wrist pin for it. Cylinder head looks pretty good. I didn't see any cracks on it. Those things are notorious for cracking, so I'll give it a little bit better inspection after I get it cleaned up. But yeah, the greasy, grimy, get your hands dirty part's about to begin, so let's get started on that. I'm still working on getting everything cleaned up here. I took a break because I need to change the fluid in the parts washer. It's not really cutting the grime like it used to. So I'm going to get that changed. But as I was sitting here thinking about what all needs to be done, you know, I got the crankcase and the flywheels kind of cleaned up. And I did put the other flywheel on so I could check and make sure the crank wasn't bent. I'll give this thing a spin here. looks okay to me. So good news there. But anyway, paint's on this thing, but not as much as I was really hoping for. And I like original engines because I'm of that crowd that they're only original once and try not to paint anything if you don't need to. But I'm kind of thinking this might be a candidate for a paint job. So I'm going to ask you, the person watching, what do you think? So leave a comment down below. I'd probably wait till the end of the video because I'm going to still put this thing all back together. I got a mechanical restoration that needs to be done. Shafts and pins and things like that need to be made new so these parts don't wobble. And that pin that's on that gear should not be stuck in there like that. So there's something going on there. Anyway, I want to leave it up to you. What do you think I should do? The color it's on this thing's pretty close to Ford tractor blue, so that's probably what I'd end up painting if I do. So if you want to see a video with this thing, once I get it running, go back through and get it all cleaned up and get it painted and make it looking new, let me know down in the comments. Or if you're in the same crowd as me, they're the original ones, and leave it the way it is, let me know either way. Be interested to see what you think. There's still definitely a lot of grease and grime on this heavy stuff here that I need to clean up still, but that's all hand work. I did use a pressure washer to speed the process up. So I mentioned making new pins and shafts and whatnot. Reason for that, this is the governor piece that goes right in there. And if you look, see right there and there, where that pin's wore. Same deal up top. It's wore there. That pin will be pretty easy to make. All it is just some 3/8 cold roll and nothing real fancy. Drill a couple holes for cotter pins and be good there. This one here, this is the trip finger for the magneto to make the ignition happen. It's definitely a little wobbly. So I was looking to see if I had any reamers, if I could ream that out. I don't, so I might end up just drilling it out next size up and then making a new oversized pin that just bolts in there. Make one of them and should have that tightened up. Like I said, that'll be pretty easy. This push rod for the exhaust valve, it's got some, I don't know how, but it's got some major scraping on it. And you can see it's got a little ledge. I thought about maybe welding that up, turning that back down on the lathe, just to get that to where it fits a little bit better in the guide here. In the head, that guide doesn't look too oval shaped, so that should be fine there. Just tighten that up, and that'll have the monkey motion stuff, as we like to call it, mainly tight or mostly tightened up. The cylinder doesn't look bad. Doesn't really have that big of a ridge, so I don't think it needs to be sleeved, but I will get some new piston rings for it. So I'm going to go finish cleaning most of this stuff up, and then I'll have to go over to Dad's shop so I can hop on a lathe and make some of these pieces and turn this thing down after I weld it up. So that's the next step. Well, we're back from Dad's, and I got my new bits and pieces made. Here's some new pins. That's the new one, that's the old one. That goes in there like that. So I'll have this all tightened up. I got a new pin on the where the trip finger goes for the magneto. This one here was actually pretty wore, especially down here. I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but heck of a wear spot on that. So that's got where this goes on here. Tightened up a good bit. This all will help in the long run of getting this thing going. Everything that's loose makes delays in your timing and things like that. So you get this stuff all tightened up. In the long run, it's going to help you. I did have a broken off bolt, welded a nut and a washer on to get it out so I could put a new matching set screw. And I did make a nut. Now, I'm an amateur machinist at best, and definitely an amateur welder at best. So I did weld this up where it had the scoring in it. I'm not going to show you that because it was sketchy. to say the least. The welding process, not so much, but the machine work, because I didn't have a steady rest for this, and I was clamped on this end of this push rod. So you can imagine this thing just flapping around in the lathe. So yeah, you're not going to get to see that. And the rest of the stuff is pretty straightforward to make. All I had to do on this was just make a little shoulder so it would slide in there. Pretty basic stuff. Making the nuts pretty basic if you ever been around a lathe. So maybe down the road when I got some better equipment to work with, or some better tooling to work with, I'll show you that process. But yeah, now that this stuff's all apart, I got more cleaning to do. I did get the solvent changed in the parts washer so I can get more of this stuff cleaned up, and I can break it down a little bit more to get to some of the thicker grease. And I still do need to pull the gas tank out of the bottom of the engine and get it cleaned out. And I'm currently waiting on parts that I haven't ordered yet to show up. So I got plenty of stuff to do to kill time there. So let's get back at it. Well, as I was taking the gas tank out, I noticed when it was coming out that it was a lot heavier than it should have been. I was like, well, maybe this thing's full of sludge in the bottom, which I kind of wish now, knowing what's in there, I'd probably rather have dealt with that than if you look in there. That thing is full up to about there of a mouse nest. So I think what I'm going to do, pull the back end of this thing off, melt all the solder around the joints, pop that end off, and clean this tank out. Attempt to solder it back up, put some tank sealer in it to seal it, and should have a good tank again. But yeah, wasn't really expecting an entire rat's nest in there. Well, that may not have been very graceful, but got the mission accomplished. That sucker's about that full, but that was a warm mouse. All right, now dump this out and clean the inside up and solder it back together. So now we got the gas tank under control, and hopefully be able to put some fuel in her and she won't leak. I got POR 15 gas tank sealer in it. First time I'm using it, so I guess we'll see how well it does. It's got a 96-hour cure time on it, so we'll get this thrown back underneath and let it cure while it's underneath, and go doing a little finishing things. I need to clean the gasket surfaces up for the head and the igniter, or the mag bracket. The head was double gasketed for some reason. There's a gasket on the back of the head and a gasket still on the block, so I need to get them taken off, make some new gaskets, and hone the cylinder out, get it cleaned up. Get that stuff done. I've already cleaned the bearings. My new piston rings showed up, so I need to get them on the piston. And then this stuff's as clean as I'm going to get it. All this stuff here is like a concrete dust. Without probably sandblasting it, it doesn't really come off all that easy. So get all that stuff thrown back on the engine and we can get this thing running. Fingers crossed. Well, we're getting close to the home stretch. Want to make a couple gaskets here, and I think we can start putting this thing back together. So I got everything laid out so I can start putting this thing back together. And we'll start with a piston, and something kind of neat the old timers came up with. On the back of the cylinder here, I don't know if you can see it, there's a taper here. And what that taper is there for, a chamfer as they call it, is to help the piston, as you're pushing it in, collapse the rings around the piston and let it go into the cylinder without having to use a ring compressor. So I did maybe get a little bit ahead of myself. I got to time the engine. You know, obviously it needs to be in time for the valves to open, the ignition to happen at the right time. Pretty simple thing to do. I just need to take the nut off the end of the shaft that holds the timing gear on and get this mark here that's on the timing gear in line with the keyway that's on the crank. And that's really how simple it is to time one of these things. Usually your timing gear's got some sort of mark on the gear or some dots, and you normally either line it up with a keyway, or if there's corresponding dots on the gear that's connected to the crankshaft, you mate them up and get it in time, and pretty much everything else follows if you haven't taken all this stuff apart. It should all just fall into place the way it should. So I'm going to do that, and I still need to shim the new rod bearing. Got a new bearing there, so I need to put that in, and I already made some shims, so I'm going to shim that. And once I get it in time and the shimming done, I can throw that flywheel back on, then we can throw the mag on, and I haven't tested the mag, see if it's got spark or not, so we'll find out together. But I'm going to start with this. So I think from here back, we're all finished, with the exception of the flywheel, which we got to throw on. I got the shims made for the connecting rod. We're all good there. Everything's moving the way it should be. All this stuff's tightened up like I said it would. So we're, you know, like a new engine almost. Not quite, but close. So flywheel's next. Put the mag bracket and the mag on, and then maybe we'll squirt a little bit of go juice in her and see if it'll at least pop off. I still got to plumb up the fuel tank. So let's get the flywheel on and try to get this thing running tonight. Well, I still don't have the fuel tank plumbed up on this thing yet, as you can tell. But I got the mag on, and you know what that means. I got to test it for spark. And, well, there's a little hole here you can put some gas in and spin this thing over, and we'll at least see if it gets to, you know, like pop off a couple times. Everything else is all tight. Everything, nuts, bolt check's already done. I did put a different oiler on it to lubricate the cylinder. I got grease in all the grease cups, all that stuff. Like I said, everything seems to be tip-top shape. So, yeah, you know, you gotta make sure it runs after doing all this hard work before you completely finish it. Got only the finest fuel delivery method here. I'll put a little snort in there. Set that to where it won't catch on fire. And give this thing a crank. Oh yeah, that should be plenty of gas. Turn that on. There we go. All right, corn tack. Well, that's not a good sign. Maybe a little too much. Now, a sane person would just pull the spark plug out and make sure it's not wet or we actually got spark, but I'm not sane. Come on. Woo! Well, I'd say that's got spark. Probably be a little bit easier if I had the fuel tank plumbed up and the muffler on it. Hey, back together, it runs though. So I done a little bit more tinkering with it. I got the fuel line plumbed up to the mixer or the carburetor. Got the muffler on it. And I did screw around with the timing a little bit. I noticed that it was firing not exactly where I like it to. Let's see if I can show you here. So it pretty much was just firing at top dead center. So I went and loosened these up and moved this around and got it to where that is about probably 8 degrees before top dead center when it trips the magneto to create the ignition. So usually when I'm around like 5 degrees before top dead center, but this, I did have it running for a few seconds with it there, and it seems to like it there. So it's pretty much complete with the exception of spraying my magic juice on there, also known as WD-40, to try to make what paint's left on there pop. So I'm gonna at least get this thing fired up for you. I'll show you it running there and see how well it runs, I guess. I've only let it run for a couple seconds, so yeah. I'll shut up and we'll fire this up. Set my choke on it there. Well, we know she runs, and I got her sprayed down with WD-40 and paints, whatever. But before we get her outside to take some glamour shots, I got one more thing I want to do to her. I got the governor spring out of it, right there. That's the one that was in it. Goes right inside of there. Governor weights are there. I'm going to slow this thing down some with either that spring or modify that one to fit in there to get this thing run slower. I like my engines to run slow. There's no need for them to sit around at an old engine show, you know, spinning at 500 RPM or whatever they might be rated at. So I'm going to see if this little spring here will slow that thing down to an acceptable speed for me, and I'll meet you outside once I get that figured out. Well, I appreciate you watching till the end, and hopefully I earned your subscription. If you haven't subscribed already, hit the little button, and I guess there's a little bell thing. You get notifications too. And don't forget about your homework. Should I leave this thing in its work clothes as you see it? Or should I blow her all back apart and give it a nice new fresh paint job now she runs pretty good? Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts on that are, and maybe here in a couple months I'll do another video on painting it, if that's what the census says. Again, I appreciate you watching to the end. Hope you enjoyed what you watched. I'll be looking forward to all the comments of everything I did wrong and how stupid I am. I get them on every video. But hey, whatever. Regardless, she's back to life again and back in one piece. So again, thanks for watching. And as I always say, go out and get your hands dirty.